Hi, welcome to the All Things LGBTQ interview show, where we interview LGBTQ guests who are making important contributions to our communities.
All Things LGBTQ is taped at Orca Media in Montpelier, Vermont, which we recognize as being unceded Indigenous land.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
I'm here with memoirist and writer and poet Judith Barrington, who's kind enough to join us from Portland today. Welcome to the West Coast, to the East Coast on Zoom anyway. It's very cold and kind of miserable here in Vermont, but you're a trooper to join us, and we're here to talk about your excellent collection of short memoirs, Virginia's Apple. I'll hold it up and it'll appear on the screen. This is a recent publication of yours, and I'm delighted to talk about it with you today.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much, Anne, for inviting me to be here in your Zoom room in Vermont, which is probably a lot colder, although it feels cold here in Portland too. So we're spanning the country.
It's cold and dreary and kind of miserable, but that goes with the territory, I guess.
Yes, but thank you.
Right. Many years ago, I read a collection that you edited that I don't see, called An Intimate Wilderness.
Oh, yeah.
And,
yes,
and it's not around anymore. Is that out of print?
I'm not sure. I probably could find it, but it's been out. It's been gone for a long time. I'm not sure if it's in print. It probably is in print, but nobody would know how to get it.
Luckily, I have it. I just glanced over at my bookshelf.
Oh, yeah.
It was.
I never stood much behind that, actually, but it is around still.
And then I was reading Sinister Snapshot, the Sinister Wisdom publication.
Right.
And one of my favorite thinkers, my favorite lesbian thinkers, Julie Enzer, was reading your book. And so I immediately seized on the opportunity to talk with you about it, and thank you for graciously accepting.
Yeah, it's a happy thing.
Let's start with a brief biography, if I may.
Yeah.
Judith Barrington's life song, a memoir, was the winner of the Lambda Book Award and was a finalist for the Penn Martha Allbrand Award for the art of the memoir. She is the author of the best-selling Writing the Memoir, From Truth to Art, widely used in creative writing programs. And let me just pause. I have a friend, Carla J. I don't know if you know her.
Yes.
But I asked her if she knew you, and she said, writing the memoir is so wonderful. She used it in one of her classes, and she used it in writing her memoir, which is pretty good. So she raved about it, and I want to pass that along.
Well, actually, I tell you that Carla J. actually introduced one of the very first readings I ever gave when I was touring with my first poetry book long ago, somewhere in New Jersey, where she was teaching.
Really? That's great. Carla is really legendary.
Yes.
And you've also written 5 collections of poetry, most recently Long Love, New and Selected Poems. Your work has appeared in as one of Creative Nonfiction's favorite prize-winning essays, and been included as a notable literary nonfiction in the Best American Essays, as notable. She and her partner Ruth Gundel founded and ran the Flight of the Mind, a residential summer writing workshop for women that took place 18 years in the foothills of Oregon's Cascade Mountains. It sounds beautiful.
It was.
You and she were also founders of Soapstone, a writing retreat for women, now Soapstone, celebrating women writers. Judith was a faculty member at the University of Alaska Anchorage MFA program and taught creative writing at universities and writing conferences across the US and the UK, as well as in Spain, Greece, and Mexico. You were born in Brighton, England, and live in Portland, Oregon. When did you settle in the States? I was trying to look that up.
76.
76. Been here a while.
Yes.
Let me just ask you a quick question about the book before we get into a reading. It's 14 autobiographical memoir short form essays. How did you happen to assemble this collection, and what were your principles of selection? Because you've published a lot of essays, a lot of places.
Yes, indeed. Well, to be quite honest, I must give a lot of credit to my partner, spouse, Ruth Gundel, who said to me one day that she realized that I'd got a lot of these short memoirs that I had published scattered all around my computer, probably not best known to where I would find them, and that some of them are really good and I should put them out in the world. And so being one of the best editors in the whole universe, she took on some of the editorial responsibility for thinking about how to put them together. Excuse me. And my principles were that they should be pieces, certainly the best written pieces. The writing was important to me more than and even the subjects. That the writing had to be good, had to be able to be edited to make it even more perfect, and could be placed in an order that when read through from beginning to end, it would also work as a story as opposed to just completely separate pieces. So when we found the pieces that seemed to do that, made them sort of roughly chronological, took out a lot of the stuff that would be repetitious so that we wouldn't repeat the same stories in different pieces or introduce the same characters again and again. That was how it came to be a whole between, something between two covers.
And your principles of selection were quality in your own view, and also chronology.
Chronology and they had to be they had to be the best writing, not just the mediocre ones, but the better ones.
Well,
I don't write for, sorry, I interrupt you, but I don't write memoir for the sort of scandalous nature of the content. I write the kind of memoir that's going to, if it's going to work, it's going to sort of glow with good writing. That's my principle.
Well, let me read this quotation from an interview of yours in which you quote Mark Doty and use that as a lead into the selection you're going to read to us today. Now, you say in this interview with Wild Shrew, Sinister Wisdom's publication, I write because I love sentences, the sound of language, the rhythms of both poetry and prose. And as Mark Doty said, we make art to make meaning out of our mortality, to counteract its brutality with beauty. Every creative act is an act of consolation for our transience, for our despair about our transience. By beauty, he doesn't mean surface beauty, but something more, like profound truth, artfully expressed. And I think this collection of yours embodies these principles. So now let me ask you to read a little from it, if you would.
I will, just a short excerpt. Well, as you know, you've read the book. One of the main themes of the book is living as a lesbian. And one of the ways that I was able to start dealing with the fact of being a lesbian, I had been in the closet before this, but I had been wanting to become more honest about it. One of the ways that happened was when I became connected to the women's liberation movement in London. And it happened sort of by chance upon it, but then I went to the Women's Liberation Office and I picked up a list of consciousness-raising groups, although I had no idea what consciousness raising was, but I decided I'd go anyway. And I went to the one that was nearest where I was living in London. This was in 19 1971. Oh, yes, 1971. And I'm going to read a little section of the very first meeting that I went to, where, where I went into a room with a bunch of women sitting around in chairs and on the floor. My ears registered a variety of accents, 2 American, 1 North Country, and the rest London, all some version of middle class. Lillian was the most casually dressed in tight jeans. One of the others looked as if she'd come straight from her job in a jacket and skirt, and everyone else, including me, wore slacks. There was no sign of makeup, and I was glad I'd kept mine to a minimum and left my hair to frizz out of its carefully straightened bob. The woman who had let me in appeared the most studious, with her wire-rimmed glasses and dark hair that fell over her face. She referred several times to books she had read, her slight stammer growing more pronounced with excitement, and once she scuttled over to a bookshelf made of bricks and planks to pull out a volume by Doris Lessing. The topic of the evening was, quote, femininity. I tried to listen to the women talking, while at the same time thinking of what I could say. I was toying with telling them about Victor Sylvester's dance school, where, when I was 15, I had been sent to acquire some necessary graces. Perfumed, middle-aged women had waltzed in each other's arms, while terrified young men in ties and shiny shoes hovered behind pillars. We few teenage girls sat on gold-painted mock Regency chairs in a line near the lemonade table, our hands folded in our laps to hold down the layers of net petticoats that threatened to spring up, lifting our skirts out in front of us to reveal a knee or a thigh or a wayward garter. At the grand piano, our pianist lifted her hands dramatically in the air and turned towards us, her penciled eyebrows raised and an encouraging smile on her powdered face, while the man in the blue suit cued us up for a quick step. She nodded meaningfully towards the boys and thumped out opening chords. Slowly they emerged, hands in pockets, trying to look as if they didn't care which girl they ended up in front of. Those of us still sitting by the middle of the dance would get up as if lemonade was what we'd wanted all along and mutter to each other about how the boys got stupider and uglier each week. For me, there wasn't much to choose between getting picked, which would mean looming over a boy who hadn't noticed my 6-foot height until I stood up, or joining the gang of the spurned. The only part I didn't mind was learning the dance steps when we spread out around the ballroom, partnerless. Standing carefully on the footprints painted on the floor, I would wobble as my femininity wavered and my low-heeled white shoes stuck their pointed toes out beyond the snub-toed diagram. Step right foot forward, the instructor said with exaggerated patience. Now, ladies, turn to face the window. Gentlemen, slide to your right and face the fire door. We lumbered around, some clockwise, others counterclockwise, then searched the floor for another footprint. Hovering on one foot, I desperately scanned the polished floorboards for a resting place, like some ungainly bird coming in to land. But I wasn't sure if this was the kind of story they'd want to hear. There you go.
I love that. It really takes me back.
Yeah.
And
The
when you
things they
first
did
started,
the things they did to try to nurture our femininity, huh?
I know. And that everybody was so awkward. It was really a terrible time in many ways, but we got through it.
A difficult age anyway, and worse when you are really a lesbian and trying not to be.
And when you start reading that passage, I thought you were going to talk about going to the women's liberation meeting early on, and people were talking about whether or not to be involved with a woman. And there's this really funny line when you said, well, actually, I've been involved with a few women, and you say the group not only perked up, they positively levitated. I mean, that really, what an acute observation, and how funny. One clear strength of the collection is that you're able to bring a retrospective perspective and include updates after the main action of the narrative. Like you go back and you see your ex-husband many years later, and you give updates about Nico, your first woman lover, as time marches on. And that's a real advantage of being older, I think, being able to look back like that. You mentioned that all the essays have been published before, except one. Which is it, and how did you happen to include it? And it's one of my favorite chapters. Because
Well, the one that's the new, and I wrote for this book, is the one called A Wild Patience, which is the story of my friendship with the poet Adrienne Rich. One of the reasons that I wrote it was when I was talking to Oregon State University Press, who wanted to publish this collection. They had, as always, two or three outside readers and who give comments on the manuscript. And one of them pointed out that the book at the beginning does introduce the theme of disability. The very first essay, When I'm a Child, I have a sort of a kind of weird experience with a disabled young man. And the fact that I end up at the age I am now of 80 with a disability and with having lived with a disability for quite a long time, did not get reintroduced back in as a theme, one of the themes of the book. And they thought it just got dropped after the very first essay. So one of the pieces I had been wanting to write had been my friendship with Adrienne. And because when she came to stay with Ruth and I, she was fairly disabled. She had very bad rheumatoid arthritis, and she was older than we were, and we had to deal with helping her in many different ways. So it seemed a good piece to write with that, a little piece of that theme in it, but also lots that fitted with all the other themes. The lesbian theme, the theme of women writers, which comes up a lot in the book. So that was the one that was not published and was written for this collection.
And I really applaud it. And because when we were talking earlier, I wondered why you hadn't written an entire essay about disability, but you have. So our conversation now has corrected me, and it's handled beautifully, I think. And I personally, related a little bit. I remember hearing Adrienne Rich read at Sanders Theater in Boston, and she was just standing. Somehow she, no one was attending to her, and she was just standing, holding onto the back of a folding chair, as all these people, mostly young lesbians like I was, filed out.
Yeah. That's exactly why we invited her to stay with us, because we had heard that she was often sort of put in the hands of younger people to take care of her, who were sort of starstruck and awestruck and did not realize that she got hungry and she needed to lie down, and the sort of things that a person with a disability really needs. So we stepped in and tried to help taking care of her that time she came for a reading.
And, I kind of rebuked myself because I remember it vividly, because I just should have gotten out of the line and offered her a chair,
Yeah.
I noticed it, but I just followed along, so it's a very important topic.
Yes, it gave me the opportunity to, at the end of that piece, to talk about how she became not just a model for me as a great poet, but also as a person who persevered with her writing, publishing books, many books after I first met her, book after book, getting more and more deep and truthful and brilliant as a writer, even while she was having an increasing difficulties with disability. So she was a model for me in persevering through the difficulties of pain or difficulties of not being able to move well.
And the one part that resonated with me, I know you, I had a session with my partner who is a poet, and we were talking about pushing through to uncomfortable truths in the poetry. And she performed such a wonderful service for you, saying, you got to go deeper. You got to go deeper when you were able to exchange poems.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
what an invaluable gift that was.
She really helped me. That particular piece of correspondence where she said, you know, you could go on being an amusing lesbian poet, but you should actually pursue this important thread in your life, which was the thread of the big tragedy that I had happen when I was 19, when I lost my parents in a big accident, a sea accident, and I had not been writing about it. And she said, you got to, that's where your most deep writing will come.
Mm-hmm. I also remember those days. I shared your passion for her before you met her. I never met her. Women in Honor, the pamphlet. I
Yeah.
own, you know, in
Yeah.
every book, everything that came out. I mean, you know, she was really galvanizing for lesbians at that time.
Yes, she was one of the few great poets who could transcend, could speak very much to our community and to the world at large, the literary world, everywhere. Her words just really rang out.
Who's your audience for this book, would you say?
Well, I hope is, of course, we writers always want to have everybody in the audience. I don't think it's just a lesbian audience, because I've found that here I've given 6 or 7 readings already, and I have had a lot of people really enjoying the book who are you know, sort of mainstream liberal friends, and you know, probably, and you know, a lot of different people. I mean, not Trump people, but pretty much everyone else. And I hope that it will resonate. Different parts of it will resonate with people who are interested in the feminist second wave, which is a lot about my participation with women's liberation and how we changed things enormously in those years. The 70s were magnificently changing times, but also people who are interested in women's literature. There's a lot about traveling around and going to find the homes of, you know, the graves of Mary Wollstonecraft and Radcliffe Hall's house, and various other expeditions to the women writers that we always have loved. So there's that. I think it will appeal to people who really are knowledgeable and interested in women's writing. So I don't know. I think there are a lot of different audiences for the book, because there are 2 or 3 main themes that probably will reach out in different directions.
We talk a little bit about the title. Would you mind talking about the significance of the apple in lesbian literature?
Well, yes. Now, I'm a great fan of Judy Grahn, and of course, Judy Grahn wrote The Highest Apple, in which she really talked a lot about. She really educated us about Sappho, and Sappho saying how her women would reach the top apple on the tree. So apple, of course, apple's got a huge amount of just sort of lots of different mythic significance, even from Eve, of course, Eve and the apple. But I think particularly I think of Sappho, and then in my book, the title comes from the actual chapter in which we go to visit Monk's house, which was where Virginia and Leonard lived in the country, right in Rodmell Village, and where Ruth picks an apple off Virginia's tree to give to me. We have a little discussion about that. I won't tell that story, but it really is the story that gives the title to the book. And Virginia, of course, recurs. Virginia's, she pops up all over the place. She's probably after Adrian and Judy Grahn. She's also one of my favorite and important writers who's been very important to me. She, excuse me, she grew up, she lived in Rodmell, which was very close to where I grew up in Sussex in England. And she used to walk on the downs, which are these beautiful green hills along the south coast, covered in sheep. And I imagine her walking. When she was writing novels, she would walk up there for many hours. And I think she probably was muttering to herself, writing the next chapter or writing the next paragraph. And then when I was a teenager, I had a horse, a pony, and I used to ride on those very same downs, on the very same area where she walked. So I have always felt like, oh, how sad that she died before I could come upon her with her muttering about the next novel. But unfortunately, we did not overlap.
Would you, you in the UK, you and 6 other women formed the Literature Collective. That's so cool. For many years, you and your partner, as your bio indicated, conducted a women writers retreats. Do you have a personal writing community now? Ruth, of course, is a guide.
Yes, Ruth is my editor and partner and long love of the last collection. We've been together for 45 years, so it's a long one. So my writing community, my whole adult life after the Literature Collective in London, when I landed in Oregon, I very quickly found other women writers, and we put on readings and helped each other. And I had been in a writing group of one kind or another, which would change from time to time, for all the years I had lived here, until not long before I started putting this book together, when I sort of suddenly had a moment of thinking, I'm done with writing groups. I was really sick of having to go to a writing group every Wednesday or whenever it was. But I thought, no, I do need that sort of feedback. So I took my courage in my hands and asked Tricia Snell, who had lived here, but then now lives in Canada, and I didn't know very well. I wrote to her and said, would she be my writing buddy? Because I liked her and I liked her writing. And she agreed. And while I was editing these chapters for the book, I would send one to her and she would give me feedback on each chapter. She was a wonderful writing buddy. And she was writing a novel at the time, which I got chapters from her. And so that's my writing community at the moment. It's Tricia and my partner, Ruth. I mean, there is a wider writing community in the city, Portland. We all know each other, or the older ones know each other. I don't know the younger ones very well, but the older ones who've read together at events for many years, we all recognize each other and like to see what we're doing.
Yes. It seems like that's a common pattern. The more one writes, the more one develops more informal connections, personal friends, or people you found during your writing career.
Yes.
What writers influenced you and how? Are there any contemporary writers you'd recommend?
Well, I'm most influenced, I think, by, when I started as a poet, so obviously I have to mention Adrienne, and Maxine Cumin was a poet who really was wonderful. She befriended me and wrote to me, and would often, when I had a new book come out, she would write to me with her, comments about it, which I loved. And actually, she sent the last note she sent me was very shortly before she died, when she wrote to congratulate me on the latest book I put out. She was lovely. I actually think she influenced me in many ways, but one way that she influenced me was she wrote a book about having had a terrible accident and broken her neck. She was dragged by a horse in a horse accident. And while she was trying to get better, they put her in one of those frames that was screwed into her head and down into her back. And she wrote a book, it's called The Halo. She inside the halo. And while she was inside the halo, of course, for many months, she was going to have MRIs of her head ready and having to go into the machine, and there would be all this crashing noise of bang, 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 you know. And she wrote in that book about it that the way she managed to survive it was because she had enough poetry memorized that she could recite poems while it was banging in her around her in the machine. And that really said a lot to me. I used to like to memorize poems, but after I read that book, I tried again, and I found that because I'm old now, I would memorize it for a day and then it would be gone. But nevertheless, she really influenced me in terms of rhythm. Some of her poems, she would say, could be sung to certain hymn tunes. So she was a poet who really influenced me. And the other poet, of course, the other writer is Virginia Woolf, who I love. Both her novels, but also her essays are really important, I think. She's a fabulous essayist. And I read the personal writings of the diaries, the letters, and in the diaries and the letters, she often writes a lot about good writing and what she thinks good writing is, and following the rhythm of the sentence. And it really taught me a lot about how one of the differences between choosing to write poems and choosing to write prose is just the difference between the rhythm of a poetic line and the rhythm of a sentence, which are two different things. And you can hear when you start to try to make up something about that you want to write about. If you have a line or you have some words, usually I can hear if it's a poetry line or if it's a prose line. And I think that's a great thing that Virginia Woolf talks a lot about, the rhythm of the sentence. I love that. I know I think my most beloved contemporary writer is Jeanette Winterson.
Oh, she's great, isn't she?
Yes, I love her. I love her very much. And I've read her for a long time. Some of her books I go back and read them again. The Passion is fabulous. Anyway,
Exactly. That's one of my favorites.
me too. And when we were in London one time, I was so excited to hear that she owns a cafe in the city of London that we went there. Of course, she wasn't there that day, but we went and had a look, and it was a tiny little cafe. It would have been great if I could have met her, but I have never met her.
And you mentioned that cafe in your book, and I wondered about it too.
Yeah,
Well, is it still going, I wonder?
I don't know. I haven't heard about it lately.
Yeah. Well, she's still producing wonderful work.
Oh, she does, yes.
What are you working on now? I know you're doing a lot of book tours and promoting this book.
Yeah, I'm not really at a place. Because I have a disability, which is a genetic disease, Charcot-Marie-Tooth. One of the symptoms of that disease is what my neurologist calls I have a very low gas tank, a small gas tank, which means that I really don't have a very long day of work in me. And as long as I'm doing something for this book, I'm doing a lot of social media for it. I've been posting pictures on Instagram that are connected to the book.
I saw them on Facebook. They're wonderful.
On Facebook too. And there are people who have been following those happily and wanting more. So that takes some time. And then, I've done a lot of readings and a lot of interviews. So I haven't had a lot of time beyond thinking what I might do. But I know that what I really want to write more now is more short form memoir. And I have some in mind, and I've got some that I started a while back. So, excuse my voice. I've got old lady voice.
Well, we're drawing to the close of our interview. It's been delightful. Let me ask you before we go if you have any valedictory commentary or final words you'd like to leave our audience with.
Well, I think I would like to, the valedictory part should definitely go to you and your, and your
Well,
station, because you're doing, I mean, this is wonderful that you do this for LGBT plus, you know, people and work and books and interviews, and the more out there, the better. I'm saying, and we really need it entrenched in the culture now, and you're doing that, and I really commend you for doing it. Thank you.
thank
And
you.
what else? Nothing else. I just thank my audience. Thank you for being interested in my book, and thank you for reading it, and thank you for buying it for presents for people for the holidays. And that's about it.
Well, I highly recommend it to our audience. It was really a pleasure to read, and it's been great talking with you, Judith
Thank you,
Barrington. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, a recent article in 7 Days talked about how the gender balance in the Vermont legislature has shifted with our most recent election. And part of that was due to the 12 new incoming Republicans, oh my, are all straight white men. Surprise. But also, sort of embedded in the article was a notation of there being one non-binary member. They totally missed that this is a first for the Vermont legislature. So please welcome for a first visit, Emily Carris-Duncan, the representative-elect for Wyndham 6. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Keith. I'm so glad to be here.
I am so, well, first, I was so glad to finally find you because I had to go through everyone's bio to find the one that was yours so that I could then invite you. But where I want to start is, how does a trans racially adopted Black, queer, non-binary person who founded the art department dedicated to the work of marginalized creative practitioners end up running for the Vermont legislature? So let's start with your connections with Vermont.
Okay, so I am from Rutland County originally. I grew up in Rutland. In my family, I'm a fifth generation Vermonter, so my family's been here for a long time. My dad actually was in the legislature. He was a senator from Rutland County, from 2006 to 2012, I think. And and I guess I think part of it is, having come up here, I also got very activated as a young person during civil union. So I think I've always to the Vermont legislature as a point of pride, honestly, and a place that I've always been kind of curious about. And yeah, I don't know. They asked me, they needed somebody to run for my district. The previous seat was previously held by Tristan Roberts, who needed to take some time off because he had a baby and needed to be with his family. And they didn't have anybody to run for the seat. And due to a number of factors, it's a real privilege to be able to do this. There are, it doesn't pay a lot. It's a huge time commitment, especially when you're further south. And given the flexibility of my work life, I figured that I would, do my part.
Okay, I want to start with, identifying that your district is Wilmington, Whittingham, and West Halifax. I want to talk a bit about you as an artist. What is your medium? What is your expression? What is it that you hope that when I look at your art, what I'm going to walk away with, how it's going to touch me?
Mm. So my work is primarily in textiles. I am a weaver and I am a quilter and a dyer mostly. I also do some knitting. And a lot of my exhibition work is in the quilting category. And most of the work is historically themed. So had a whole series based on herbs that are used in women's health and used for abortion historically, and used those as dyes and created some quilts around that. And sometimes they're color themed. So depending on what the theme is, I hope that you walk away one with a sense of curiosity and wonder for the amount of labor that it goes in to create work, and also the historical kind of tie, whatever that may be, to the work. And I think especially with quilts, I'm very fascinated with them as a form, because in one sense they are a piece of comfort. Like they are so often a an anchoring point for people, and they literally offer warmth, like they are a necessary tool. And then they also historically at times may have been used for maps, like they can be code carriers, so that's where, you know that's
Okay, I want to go back to your identification as a non-binary queer person, because I want to know how your identification as non-binary influences your art, and then how you
Mm,
think it might influence your approach to politics.
mm.
So I think I need to start though with, when you identify as non-binary, how do you define that?
So for me, I guess like I was of kind of an old, like I was an old tomboy. Like in the grand large scheme of what, masculinity is and femininity is, I spent so much of my youth being misidentified. And that, of course, people have that story but don't end up non-binary. But it that those experiences just made me kind of feel very fluid in my presentation. I have a mom who, loves Coco Chanel, and like, grew up in an era where like, wearing pants and bucking the trend was like a really, it's a big deal. So I think in the history of like fashion and gender presentation and being kind of more rough and tumble and having to, especially in my youth, kind of fight for that position. Um, I also, when it comes to my artwork, I view kind of gender in the textile industry, because textile work is so much um, kind of put in a feminine framework, especially handwork. But on an industrial level, it's a very masculine job. Like most of the machines still these days are run by men.
Oh, I'm surprised by that.
Yeah. Yeah. If you like, you can watch like videos on YouTube of like take factory tours, and you see it's a lot of it's men's work all over the world.
All
So
right.
there's this constant like interesting back and forth between how gender interplays, and then even taking it to the farm, where a lot of textiles are grown on farm and stuff, and that also has an interesting interplay between masculine and feminine work. So it touches both genders' hands for sure.
Okay, now how does that then move into your approach to politics, or
Mhm.
this moment in our political activism, and maybe a little bit about how your father's tenure in the legislature may have influenced you?
Oh, sure, yeah. So I think, at least on the non-binary side, I think it has made me a pretty global thinker. I tend to like to take in, both sides or whatever, all the many sides of an argument before I come to a decision. Um, and try not to like, come down hard on one side or the other too quickly. Um, and as far as my dad's tenure in the legislature, I had the opportunity to intern with him his last session, and I got to see firsthand how it all worked. And I also kind of, especially as his daughter, and observing, him having, because he was, in Rutland County, so he was away too, like him being away 4 days a week and kind of what all of that meant. I got a sense of what the job was, and it still is an interest to me. So it didn't turn me away from it at all.
Okay, was there a particular aspect of the political process that was intriguing to you? And was there a sense of, if I'm part of this, this is the change I could help make?
Um, I think the thing I find most interesting is it is an area that weaves together so many different things. So like for housing, for instance, that is very much, hot on the topic. And it is very much, it's shelter, but it's also healthcare. It's also natural resources. It's also the environment. It's also education, very closely tied to education. It is workforce. It is so deeply braided into the fabric of our of our state. So I think being in an environment where you can kind of tackle all of those things together, because I've spent so many years, kind of on the outside as like an activist, as an advocate, and I'm excited about the idea of being able to take these many different avenues and kind of work on solutions that are comprehensive.
Okay, so for you, what are your legislative priorities for this coming session?
Housing.
Okay, that was a fast, very simple answer. And I think it's the common response. But to you, what does housing mean? What
It
what
means
kind of reform, or how extensive do you see that definition as being?
Oh, yeah, it's a very multi-pronged thing. And I think we have to also be mindful that, it's not just everybody wanting a single family home on 3 acres or something like that, it's being able to build smaller units, because there are plenty of people that would like smaller units. There are plenty of people that would prefer to rent versus own. So I would love to, and I know the legislature for the last, few sessions has they've really been working towards comprehensive housing solutions. So finding ways for us to get more units online. And then the thing for me, especially because I've owned homes for the last 10 years, I'm like really interested in insulation and weatherization and making sure that our houses are as tight as possible so that we're using less energy, as a person who lives in an old house and really really would like to tighten it up.
And my guess is that in that broad spectrum, you also are including shelters for those that are housing insecure.
Yes. So yeah, I haven't even gotten there yet. Yes, that's definitely like when I think especially about getting more small units online, I want to think about, not necessarily shelter-based, like, large sort of warehousing shelter-based solutions, but can we think about getting people an address, so that they can become more stabilized. Those things are really important, because when you're houseless and you don't, I've experienced this myself. When my transition into the state was really bumpy. We spent 10 months looking for a place, bouncing from family to hotels to, whoever would kind of take us, and being able to have one stable little address would have made a huge difference.
Now, you had also made reference to housing and education. You know, what is your hope in that relationship?
So with that, I mean, that's so down to the tax, the tax and housing relationship. So looking about at ways to maybe see if we can shift some of the education burden off of the tax system a little bit. So I'm thinking about things like our mental health or just like health services in general. The school budget takes up a ton of that. And should that still be in the school budget? I'm not sure. Um, so trying to think about maybe some tweaks like that, but also looking at ways for us to use our underutilized school buildings for things like mental health care and social services and, you know, even community sports, similar to what's happening down in the town of Wilmington in my district with the old school. So they're co-locating a number of different services in a school that in the old high school that had been vacant for a little while. So they're thinking about ways to reuse these buildings to better serve the community.
So other than housing and education, you had mentioned healthcare. Is that a
Yeah,
priority for you?
it's a huge priority, and especially because I think about for the queer community in particular, like all of these things are braided. And so when I move through life, I'm always moving with that in mind. Especially for BIPOC and queer folks who can have a harder time accessing these things. So our healthcare system is in grave need. It's in so much need, especially since COVID. The system has taken a huge hit, and a lot of people in our state live in isolation, and we are an aging population. We need services. So being in housing again plays another role. We can't find the help that we need because we also can't house the help that we need. I was just reading the story
Exactly.
about a doctor. Right. I was just reading a story about a doctor who spent 8 months looking for a place to live and almost left. Like it's kind of unsustainable.
Yeah, please come work with us, but we're going to give you a tent on the front lawn because that's all we can find for you right now. So what committee are you hoping to be assigned to once the session starts?
I'm very interested in housing in general. And then I also am interested in education, the environment, and I would say like commerce,
Okay, because I know that
farms.
prior to the session starting, you get to state, these are the committees that I would be interested in. But once the speaker is voted on, then committee assignments are forthcoming. So
Yeah.
you will be coming to Montpelier soon. So hopefully you've been able to find housing for the session.
Yes, I do believe I have.
Because that can be a challenge. So what are you most looking forward to for this upcoming session or serving as a representative?
Oh gosh, I'm so eager to learn. I'm really I'm really excited to just learn more about what Vermonters need, how I can help Vermonters, and um, I'm curious to see how we can put all of our heads together to kind of move us because it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge this session. So I'm excited to be able to work with cross coalitions of people to like make things happen.
All right. So I'm looking forward to meeting you at the inauguration.
Thank you. Likewise.
Congratulations on being elected.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for having me.
And I'm looking forward to inviting you back.
Oh, I look forward to coming back.
Thank you for joining us. And until next time, remember, resist.